October 9, 1942. The skies over the fortress of Rabaul, a lone heavily damaged American bomber struggling to stay aloft, her crew bleeding and desperate, and closing in from above and below, a swirling pack of 15 Imperial Japanese Navy A6M0 fighters, their pilots hungry for the kill. The flying fortress was minutes, perhaps seconds, from annihilation. Her fate seemed sealed, but what happened next defied all logic, all doctrine, and every expectation of the enemy. This is not just a story of survival. This is the story of a pilot pushed beyond the edge who performed a maneuver so audacious, so desperate, that it would become the stuff of legend. This is when 15 Zeros ambushed a lone B-17 over Rabaul. To understand the sheer scale of the odds, we must first understand the stage. By late 1942, the Japanese stronghold of Rabaul, on the island of New Britain, was the beating, hostile heart of their South Pacific Empire, a labyrinth of airfields and anchorages, protected by hundreds of anti-aircraft guns and the elite aviators of the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service. For Allied aircrews, a mission to Rabaul was a dark lottery. Our story centers on one aircraft and one crew on that October day. B-17, Flying Fortress. Serial number 41 to 2653. Nicknamed San Antonio Rose of the 19th Bombardment Group, 435th Bombardment Squadron. Her commander was a 24-year-old pilot from Los Angeles, First Lieutenant William R. Billy Linton. Alongside him were 9 other men, each specialists in their grim trade, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, and a team of gunners manning the 50 caliber machine guns that were their only hope against fighters. Their mission that morning was a high-risk photo reconnaissance and bombing run over Rabaul's Simpson Harbor. Intelligence suggested a heavy cruiser was docked there. The Rose would go in alone, a solo, daylight penetration of the most heavily defended target in the theater. It was a testament to the desperate need for intelligence and the sheer courage of the men who volunteered for such flights. As San Antonio Rose droned northwards over the Solomon Sea, the sun glinting off her olive-drab fuselage, the atmosphere inside was thick with focused tension. They were flying into the Dragon's jaws. At 1,150 hours, Rabaul's ominous volcanic caldera came into view. Lieutenant Linton pushed the 4 Wright Cyclone engines to maximum continuous power, beginning the bomb run at 24,000 feet. The sky, momentarily serene, exploded into violence. Sound of flak bursts. First came the flak dark, oily puffs of smoke erupting with concussive force around them, rocking the massive bomber. The Japanese gunners on the ground had found their range. Navigator First Lieutenant WWII called out course corrections, his voice steady over the interphone. In the bombardier's plexiglass nose, First Lieutenant John C. Gamble peered into his Norden bomb sight, the harbor, and its prize, sliding into his crosshairs. "Bomb bay doors open," he announced. For a few fleeting seconds, the world narrowed to the site's calibrated lines. Bombs away, the San Antonio Rose lurched upward, relieved of her payload. Bombs were seen impacting near the cruiser, but there was no time for celebration. Bandits. 10 o'clock high. The call from the top turret gunner, Sergeant James H. Dyer, was sharp, immediate. Little did they know the flak had been a mere prelude. The real threat was now diving from the sun. A coordinated force of 15 Mitsubishi A6M30 Model 32 fighters, belonging to the Japanese Navy's crack 10 and Air Group, had been vectored onto them. The Zero, at this stage of the war, was a mythically agile predator, capable of outturning any Allied aircraft. Against 15 of them, a lone B-17's doctrine was simple: close up the formation. But there was no formation. There was only the Rose. By 1,205 hours, the first pass came. A screaming dive from the front quarter, cannons and machine guns flashing. Metal tore into the fortress's left wing and fuselage. The gunners responded, their twin. 50 seconds in the chin, top, ball, and tail turrets stuttering out defiance. Tracers laced the thin, high-altitude air in a deadly web. The radio operator, Sergeant Howard S. Bisson, sent out a frantic distress call, knowing no friendly aircraft were within 100 miles. Inside, the cacophony was hellish, the deafening roar of the engines, the jackhammer chatter of their own guns, the sickening thud of enemy rounds impacting, and the scream of one through torn metal. For 20 minutes, the dance of death continued. The Zeros attacked in relays, employing their favorite high-side attacks, aiming for the cockpit and engines. One by one, the B-17 systems began to fail. The oxygen system was shot out, forcing the crew to struggle on portable bottles. The No. 3 engine began streaming oil, then seized with a terrifying shudder. Lenton and his co-pilot, First Lieutenant James Duffy, fought the controls as the bomber lost altitude and stability. A 20mm cannon shell exploded in the radio compartment, wounding Bisson. Another shattered the plexiglass in the nose, sending shrapnel into Gamble's leg. The tail gunner, Sergeant Earl L. Momo, reported his turret was jammed. The San Antonio Rose was becoming a bleeding, crippled whale, and the sharks circled for the kill. By 1,225 hours, the situation was critical. The B-17 was down to 18,000 feet and losing height fast, wallowing on 3 engines. The once orderly interphone was now a chaotic stream of damage reports and warnings. They're coming in at 6 o'clock low. Fire in the bomb bay extinguished. Waste gunner hit. Blood slicked the fuselage deck. The smell of cordite smoke and fear filled the pressurized cabin. Then came the coup de grace. A well-aimed burst from a Zero pilot shattered the cockpit's windscreen. Shards of plexiglass and metal ripped through the enclosed space. Co-pilot Duffy took a fragment to his neck and shoulder, slumping forward, grievously wounded. Linton felt a searing pain in his left arm and side. Hydraulic fluid, vital for controlling the aircraft, sprayed from severed lines, coating the instruments and floor in a slippery, flammable film. The controls grew heavy, then slack. The No. 4 engine, peppered with gunfire, began to overheat, its propeller windmilling uselessly. The lead Japanese flight leader, confident of his victory, positioned his Zero directly off the B-17's shattered nose, a mere 100 yards away. He slowed, almost hovering, a gesture of dominance. It was a signal the kill was his. Other Zeros formed a loose, predatory circle. They had won. The fortress was defenseless. Her guns were falling silent, ammunition was running low, and one gunner after another was wounded or fighting to clear jams. The aircraft was descending into a lower, thicker atmosphere, but it offered no escape, only a longer, more agonizing fall. In the cockpit, Lenton, bleeding and struggling for breath in the thin, cold air, assessed the impossible. He had one functioning aileron, limited elevator control, 2.5 engines, a crew of wounded men depending on him, and 15 enemy fighters waiting to deliver the final blow. The vast, indifferent expanse of the Solomon Sea waited 18,000 feet below. To ditch in those shark-infested waters hundreds of miles from base was a death sentence. To continue flying was to provide target practice. Every rule, every manual, every instinct said the story of the San Antonio Rose ended here, in a fiery spiral into the ocean south of Rabaul. And then, in that moment of utter hopelessness, an idea flashed in Billy Lenton's mind. It was not from any manual. It was born of pure, desperate instinct. He remembered the Zero's one true weakness, a weakness often forgotten in its legend of agility, its lack of structural armor, and self-sealing fuel tanks. He also remembered something about its behavior at low speed. An insane, suicidal plan formed. He keyed his damaged interphone, his voice a raw, determined crackle. "All right, listen up. We're not done yet. Top turret. Waist gunners, when I give the signal, I want you to pour everything you have left into the Zero on our nose. Don't let up. Everyone else, hang on." With his remaining strength, Lenton did the unthinkable. He slammed the throttles of the 2 left engines forward while pulling back the right. At the same time, he stood on the left rudder pedal. The wounded B-17, a 30-ton behemoth, responded with a groaning, metallic protest. It yawed violently to the left, its nose swinging sideways like a clumsy, bludgeoning fist. The Japanese flight leader, expecting a final, straight and level attempt at flight or a slow descent, was taken completely by surprise. The massive, silvered propellers of the B-17's left wing, spanning over 100 feet tip to tip, suddenly filled his entire field of vision. He was not facing machine gun fire. He was facing a threshing blade of solid metal. In a panic, the Zero pilot shoved his own stick forward to dive away. But Lenton, anticipating this, shoved the B-17's control column forward as well. He was no longer trying to fly a bomber. He was aiming it. The descending Fortress and the diving Zero converged. There was a sickening, grinding crash of shearing metal. The B-17's left outboard propeller chewed directly through the Zero's tail assembly, shredding the rudder and left horizontal stabilizer. The impact slammed through the bomber's airframe, but she flew on. The Zero, catastrophically damaged, spun out of control, a leaf in a whirlwind, and plummeted toward the sea. The result was instantaneous and electric. The remaining 14,000 pilots were stunned. They had never seen, nor could have conceived of, such a tactic. It was a barbaric, close-quarter act of aerial ramming by a bomber. The psychological shock was absolute. Their tight, confident formation broke. For precious seconds they hesitated, reassessing the madman in the dying Fortress. Lenton didn't wait. He immediately jammed the controls into a steep, spiraling dive to the right, directly toward the deck of the Ocean. It was a maneuver no B-17 was designed to perform, stressing the wounded airframe to its theoretical limit. The scream of the wind became a shriek. The crew, though still conscious, were pinned to their stations by G-forces. The altimeter unwound in a frantic blur. 15, 12,000, 8,000 feet. The Zeros, taken aback by the violent dive and the loss of their leader, gave chase, but they had lost their tactical advantage. The lower altitude and the B-17's desperate, unpredictable evasions made clean gun passes difficult. More critically, the Fortress was now heading away from Rabaul toward open sea. The fighters, at the limit of their own range, could not pursue indefinitely. For 10 more agonizing minutes, the running battle continued at wave-top level, but the fury had gone out of the attack. One by one, the Zeros, low on fuel and ammunition, broke off and turned back toward Rabaul. At 500 feet above the Solomon Sea, trailing smoke, leaking fluids, and carrying her burden of wounded and dead, the San Antonio Rose was suddenly, miraculously, alone. The ordeal was not over. The 400-mile flight back to their emergency field at Port Moresby was a testament to sheer determination. With a shattered cockpit, failing instruments, and 2 seriously wounded pilots, the navigator, WWII, essentially talked Lenton through the controls. The gunners administered first aid. For 4 hours, the dying aircraft limped south. Miraculously, they made it. Lenton, bleeding profusely and nearly unconscious, managed a controlled crash landing at 7 Mile Drome. The San Antonio Rose skidded to a final mangled halt on the runway. She would never fly again. Of the 10 men who had left that morning, 2 co-pilot James Duffy and Waist Gunner Sergeant Georgie Williams had succumbed to their wounds during the return flight. Every other crew member bore injuries, but they had returned from a mission deemed unsurvivable. They had confirmed the cruiser in harbor, and they had, against every conceivable odd, lived to report it for his extraordinary leadership, unparalleled airmanship, and valor in the face of certain death. First Lieutenant William R. Lenton was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest award for combat bravery. Several of his crew received Silver Stars and Purple Hearts. The legacy of this engagement, however, transcends a single medal citation. The story of the San Antonio Rose spread through the 5th Air Force like wildfire. It became a powerful symbol of resilience, a testament to the idea that no situation was entirely hopeless, and that the courage and ingenuity of a single crew could defy the most overwhelming mathematics of war. While the tactic was never formally endorsed, the lesson was clear. The spirit of the men inside the machine was an unquantifiable and sometimes decisive weapon. The Zero had met its match not in a superior aircraft, but in an indomitable will. The shattered hulk of the San Antonio Rose was scavenged for parts, her story slowly fading into the vast archive of the war. But for one desperate hour in October 1942, over the hostile skies of Rabaul, 10 men wrote a chapter of aviation history defined by blood, metal, and unbelievable courage. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to World War II Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life. A ground crewman's hand touching one of the giant bent propeller blades on the left wing, specifically the one that struck the Zero, a detailed shot of the battle damage. For his extraordinary leadership, unparalleled airmanship, and valor in the face of certain death, First Lieutenant William R. Linton was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest award for combat bravery. Several of his crew received Silver Stars and Purple Hearts. The legacy of this engagement, however, transcends a single medal citation. The story of the San Antonio Rose spread through the 5th Air Force like wildfire. It became a powerful symbol of resilience, a testament to the idea that no situation was entirely hopeless, and that the courage and ingenuity of a single crew could defy the most overwhelming mathematics of war. While the tactic was never formally endorsed, the lesson was clear. The spirit of the men inside the machine was an unquantifiable and sometimes decisive weapon. The Zero had met its match not in a superior aircraft, but in an indomitable will. The shattered hulk of the San Antonio Rose was scavenged for parts, her story slowly fading into the vast archive of the war. But for one desperate hour in October 1942, over the hostile skies of Rabaul, 10 men wrote a chapter of aviation history defined by blood, metal, and unbelievable courage. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to World War II Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.